Hi everyone, this is an updated version of my earlier videos on how to produce good science graphs using Excel. The version of Excel I'm using is Excel 2011 for Mac, but what I'm saying applies to any version that features the ribbon that you have at the top of your Excel window like that, so 2007 for Windows onwards. I'm going to start by calculating an average of my data points just by typing this formula, highlighting the cells and entering, and I'm going to drag down that formula by dragging on the bottom right like so. And finally, I just want to display this data to a consistent number of decimal places. So if I highlight the data, right click, select Format Cells, I can then select Number, and what I want to do is display the data to one decimal place like that, which is important if you're going to use your table to display your data later on. Personally, I would always use Word for that particular purpose. Now, to plot the graph, you need to highlight your data, so drag over one column and select a second column. On Mac, what you need to do is press the Command key and then drag down the second column. On Windows, it's slightly different. Press and hold the Control button instead. And then to insert the graph, I'm going to go on Mac once again to Charts at the top, though if you're in Windows, select Insert, and then I'm going to select a scatter graph, a marked scatter in this case, which doesn't link the points dot to dot, which is the most appropriate version most of the time for science graphs. Now, there's my graph. This version of Excel does a much better job than previous versions in displaying a formatted version of the graph that's more appropriate for science, but there are still quite a few things you need to do in order to make it suitable. So I'm going to start by moving the graph by right-clicking on it, selecting Move Chart, and then displaying as a new sheet. Now, one other thing I want to do with this particular graph is at the moment I have on my y-axis over here my time displayed, the drop time, and on the x-axis I've got the height from which I'm dropping some paper cones, which is where this data comes from if you're familiar with some of my older videos. Now actually I want to swap the axes around. I want to plot time on the x-axis, height on the y-axis, which will make analysis much easier. Now there is a simple way of swapping the two axes around. The way you do it here is you go to Select at the top. On Windows it usually says Select Data, and when you click on that you will get a box which looks similar to that. Now in the Mac version you will notice I've got two dialog boxes here for the X and Y values. In most of the PC versions these dialog boxes don't immediately appear, and you've got to click a little edit button down here somewhere to make them appear. And you'll notice that my X values at the moment come from sheet 1, cells A4 to A11, whereas my Y values come from E4 to E11. Now what I need to do is to change these two things around, and the easy way of doing that is simply to go into that box, delete the A and replace it with an E, and then to go into the second box, delete the E and replace it with an A, and doing that should successfully reverse the two axes around. Now, to smarten this up, I'm going to start by deleting the legend, and I also want to add a few things to the graph. If I go to Chart Layout at the top, I can now add a chart title above the chart, a horizontal axis below the axis, and also a vertical axis. I'm going to use the rotated title, and then I can start actually writing in the things that I want. Excuse me. There we go. So I'll delete where it says Chart Title, and I'm going to give this the name Falling Paper Cones. And for the axis title over here, this is going to be my drop height in centimeters, and down at the bottom I'm going to have my drop time in seconds. Things are starting to look better. Next little thing, I want to add some grid lines to the graph to make it easier to take values from it. So I'm going to add major and minor grid lines both vertically and horizontally. These are already formatted, so I don't need to change the colour. And next little thing is you'll notice that my drop height goes all the way to 300, but I don't have any data above 250. This is something Excel does automatically. It automatically chooses a scale, and scale isn't always appropriate. So if you want to change it, right-click on one of the axes. You can also get to the dialog box I'm going to by using the axis button at the top, but I'm going to select Format Axis, and it should bring up this dialog box here. I need to select the scale box, and then what I can do is alter the maximum value. Now if you're on a PC, before you can actually change this you need to click on the fixed little tick mark box next to the maximum box, and I'm going to make it go up to 250. I can also use this dialog box to change the spacing between my major grid lines and my minor grid lines. Now I'm happy with my major grid lines, but I'm just going to increase the number of minor grid lines that I've got by changing that from 10 to 5. And when I do so, you'll notice I've got far more grid lines close together. I'm also going to do the same thing with the x-axis. So once again, format axis, and I'm going to change the minor unit here to 0.05, which increases the number of grid lines. Now I'm nearly there. One final thing I want to do is if I right-click a data point, I can now format data series, and this gives me a way of changing the style of the point. So I'm going to go to marker style. Rather than use automatic, I'm going to use a cross, and I'm going to reduce its size to about 6. And finally, I'm going to select marker line, and I'm going to change that from automatic to black. And doing that should display some nice black crosses on my graph. And there is our finished graph.